Okay, the school committee special meeting will come to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Aguirre?
Here.
Mr. Coogan?
Here.
Mr. Costa?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Corey?
Here.
Mr. Moran?
Here.
Mayor Correa?
Here. Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived or unperceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. And if we could have a salute to the flag, please. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do not have anyone signed up for public input time this evening. And tonight we're here for one special item on the agenda, a very important one, that I know the school committee and the school department and city have been working very hard to address, to continue to deliver great services to students in transportation. So we have the discussion and vote to approve or reject. However, I think that we have already approved as a placeholder the transportation budget. So this would be to reconsider or reject, not to approve something that's already been approved, the fiscal year 2020 transportation bids. Can we adjust this too? This is a little loud. There's like an echo. Thank you. Superintendent, you want to open it up?
Sure. So, since the last meeting, we've been looking at the total cost of the transportation bids and having conversations as to things that we can do to reduce those costs. We were having, at the same time, conversation to see, could we simply extend the current contracts that we have by 1 year? The IG has given us an opinion that that is not possible to do at this time. So therefore, the committee has one of essentially three decisions to make: accept the bids as they are, reject the bids and go out to bid again, or look at going out, rejecting the bids to go out again, specifically just for a 1-year contract, pending additional work that would be done inside the school system this coming year around routes, and then going back out to bid for a long-term contract this following winter/spring. There may be other options as well, but those are the three that I came up with in thinking and discussing. You have tonight materials in front of you. The last page is a memo from the mayor to the members of the committee supporting or essentially recommending that looking at a 1-year contract is likely the best option at this moment in time, given where we are. And so therefore, tonight's purpose of a special meeting, time sensitive, was to come forward with an ability to have a discussion, answer questions, and then for the committee to ultimately make a decision as to which direction to go.
Questions from the committee, comments? I think it's important for us to just take a step back and evaluate some of the options that are before us. One of the things that I've heard from committee members is, and we've discussed internally, is the possibility of the city purchasing some of these vehicles, some of these school buses, and having the operation done by outside vendors. So I think that a 1-year extension of some type in a new contract by bidding 1-year contract will allow us the breathing room to use the software that we purchased to create the routes that are appropriate, as well as negotiate and really discuss amongst ourselves and the school department officials what our true needs are and what the true cost can be to transport students effectively and safely to our schools. As that certainly is the goal of this committee, I assume. Every member wants that, and you want to do it in the most cost-effective way without cutting any kind of services to kids. So that's what I think the 1 year does for us. It buys us a little bit of time to do the route software upgrades that we need with the software that we purchased, and to bid out exactly the amount of buses that we do need, or purchase our own buses if that's what makes most sense. So with that, I'll let my colleague speak. Mr. Aguirre.
So to the superintendent and the administration, is there any other presentation of any information since the last meeting? We had a lot of discussion at the last meeting. My stance was very clear where I stood. Any updates?
I think, honestly, I think your stance at the joint meeting was one of the catalysts to why we're here tonight as well. You took a pretty hard stance in rejecting the bids and going back out to bid. and I think that was one of the catalysts. I know in our meeting, we discussed that, the superintendent, myself, the vice chairman, and his team, the superintendent's team and my team, and I think that that was an important point to be made. But I don't know of any new information that's come to light directly off the top of my head. Mr. Pacheco, I think, has had some discussions with the companies where we can invite him to the podium to discuss those, if you'd like.
Anything specific, Mr. Aguirre?
No, I mean, I think it's just a general, whether it's this case or any case, we come to a meeting, whatever day it is, we talk about a lot of stuff, we talk about we ask a lot of questions. The response back is sometimes, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to do this, that, we're going to, whatever it is. Whether I win or lose the vote isn't the issue, but then we come back now for a special meeting. As one member of the committee, I was expecting to get some sort of information, update, something, based on everything that was said we were going to do. Talking about how much money, I wanted to throw the bids out not because of any particular companies. We can't afford it. The city just quite frankly can't afford it. So I don't know whether it was a month ago or whatever the last meeting was, I personally expected to get something from the school administration of the work that they've done and either something to go on, to make a better, more informed decision now. And I still haven't gotten it.
If I may, so I met with the 3 low bidders to discuss the possibilities of consolidating routes, reducing the amount of buses that are being utilized, the amount of tiering that we could possibly do, and all 3 companies offered up suggestions, and a few companies offered up dollar amounts that they felt comfortable. If we did X, Y, and Z, they would be able to reduce by certain dollar amounts. So that's the work that's been done probably over the last 3 weeks.
And the result of that was?
The result of that is we're here today. The reduction was significant, but it didn't get to a point where we were at something that was doable. So we did reduce one particular company about $800,000, another company close to $6 million, and another company was $4 million.
And the recommendation we received was from the mayor. And what's the recommendation of the school folks?
My recommendation at this time is that we should reject and go out and attempt a 1-year contract rebid.
In essence, agreeing with the letter.
That's what I said.
So the issue of the Inspector General's ruling about negotiating.
The
Can somebody
contract, yeah,
clarify
the contract did not have language in it which said it could be extended beyond the 5 years. So therefore, it is not an option. If the contract would have said with renewals beyond the 5 years, then we could have sat down and asked the particular companies, all the companies, to extend their current contract for 1 year. Since it didn't have that language in the contract, then the contract ends at the date that it has on record, and that we would have to go out for a 1-year contract if that's what the committee wanted, in order to extend for just 1 year.
And that's for
And the
both,
bids would have to be thrown up.
that's for both regular ed and special ed?
If we were to put them out to bid, yes.
No, the issue of whether we can't,
You couldn't extend the contract period. So
for either.
For either, because it was a contract. The contract language did not allow for it to be extended.
And even though it's not 30B or whatever, that has no bearing on what you're saying. So if it's not 30B transportation.
If it's not 30B transportation, we can do what we need to do. If we want to negotiate now for special education, then we can. However, what you're leaving to be out to bid, no one company could bid on that, because all of the companies would require extra buses. So the regular ed transportation, from what I've been led to believe from each company, is that the amount of buses required to do the regular ed portion would require some companies, if not all companies, to retool, basically have enough buses to do that. And for us to take regular education and, again, break it up into pieces, I'm not quite sure what that would look like. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. So the documents that I've been working on, along with Donna and her staff, for the last week and a half, is an identical bid spec to what we had. No GPS, no cameras, nothing extra, just the exact routes that were bid 5 years ago with a couple of upgrades and changes that have happened in the course of 5 years. That's the documents that we've been working on. If we choose to go out all that way, if we're choosing to negotiate special ed for 1 year, that's up to the committee.
So, based on what you're saying, if you're saying we did one and we just negotiated with the special ed like we can, because at first we were told we can't. Now we're said that
If
your
you
answer
throw
was
the
that
bids out, if you throw the
we
bids
throw the
out,
bids out.
yes.
We could negotiate with the current companies, whatever they were, to say, you need an increase, obviously, but not 33% like we had. What you just said, though, was that if we have regular ed, no companies would have enough buses.
I'm saying that because I'm dealing with the documents that have been given to me. There wasn't one company who said they had enough vehicles to do this. They were all buying new buses. They all had buses that needed to be upgraded. They may not have had enough buses in their fleet to take on our current work on regular ed and the work that they currently have. No one told me different. So, as one entity.
Yeah, right.
So if we're going to take the regular ed piece and we're going to scatter that amongst the 5 companies, 6 companies, however many ever want to bid on regular ed, then I'm sure everyone has an amount of buses to do that. I'm not sure that's the best case scenario for the district.
But it's doable. That's probably...
Anything is doable. It's just, I don't think it's the best case scenario because, we're dealing with a situation where we're going to be eliminating all cost-saving measures that the district could do. And if the numbers came back higher than expected, we don't have another option.
Yeah. I'm of the belief that we should negotiate for the 1 year. Throw the bids out, especially the special ed. Go negotiate with those companies with a slight increase, like which we've done in the past, to make sure that we can transport our students. The other piece of it, in the regular ed portion, the increase was 160% over what your numbers were from the same transportation last year. So I'm quite certain that if we break that up into 2, 3, whatever you think, we're not going to have a 160% increase. How much worse could it get, put it that way? If we're already at 101.6, whatever it was, I think it was 1 million to 2.6 million. That's a big difference. So I'm of the belief that we should certainly do that. I was of that belief a month ago, and I think we're a month behind at this point. But my last question would be, if that happens, would we then have to take a vote today to authorize the specs for the new bid, or is that something you need
I would
more
ask that it
time?
would be done on Monday, and we'll put it on the agenda for Monday.
Yeah, I think the city doesn't have the money. I know we didn't talk about dollars and cents, but the more we take on the transportation, the less they'll have to give us for, the other pieces, and I appreciate the superintendent's opinion and your opinion that you think we should do this, and I'm of agreement on that. So when the time is right, I'll be happy to make a motion or allow one of my colleagues. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Coogan?
Did you say we saved 1.8 million off of the $2.6 million increase with what you've been doing since the last meeting?
Yes.
And the 1.8, did that come through reduction in like the 4 cameras to 2, the GPS, the year of the buses?
It came not from cameras at all, not from the GPS at all. It came from consolidating of routes, just looking at the size of the buses. It was, I have to say that the companies worked very hard on doing that work. They dug down deep and basically told us that there's a lot of room for improvement, and Obviously, some of it had to do with some bell schedules, so we would be looking at bell schedule changes in some of our schools to allow for more tiering. The possibilities are endless if we're as flexible as they were being.
Right, but we can't change those things in the contract that we are,
We cannot change them in the contract we currently have, nor will we be able to change them if we scatter these prices, these bids out to a bunch of companies. We won't be able to do that.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Exel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions. So you were able to talk to the companies who currently bid, and we were 1.8 less. So what was,
From 11.9.
right, so we went, and last year, we were at 900?
Nine.
I mean, no, I'm sorry, 9 million.
9.2.
So what's the difference now? Where are we at with the reductions?
11.8, we would be 10.1, 10.2.
All right, so $1 million more if we stick with the bids, and, you know, I mean, the way
I just like to add too that because of the time frame, and I don't have a definitive answer, although a few companies were concerned that they may have lost the ability to buy buses in time for what we have to do, and the longer it takes, obviously, the more difficult that's going to be. So I'm not completely positive that the companies that I'm dealing with have that ability to continue offering the price, the reductions, and the fleet.
right, so.
You know, that would be a conversation I'd have to have with them.
Last meeting, we voted, you know, the committee voted to accept the bids and move forward. We put out this big proposal, paid money to someone to look at everything. We looked to increase the safety for the students, add some additional stuff on the buses. So we were going to get a better product. We went through the legal process of it. We did everything legally. We were told, you know, we couldn't necessarily backpedal at the time. We felt like there was a legal reason we couldn't throw those bids out, right? We put it out for bid. They gave us a bid. We had to accept it, right? And if we didn't accept it within so many days, it was thrown out. And we were worried that if we threw it out and we went out to rebid, that the cost would be even greater. So we're not worried about greater costs at this point.
I think, Mr. Hudson, I think the issue now is that we're looking at a one-year contract and not a 5. If we were going out for a 5, I personally believe, I don't believe that rebids are usually better. That's my personal belief. With 10 years at DPW in the city, there were not many times when a second bid was better than a first. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but so the difference is it's not apples for apples now. So we are going out to an old-style bid where all of the routes are scattered and everyone can pick and choose what they want to bid for. That's what we're asking. That's what we'll be asking for on Monday if the committee chooses to go that route.
Right.
It's not the same going out for bid as what I had originally thought would be going out for the full package as it was. You know, it's two different things.
I was happy that you can get the cost down that low. That makes sense to
I
me.
was very pleased that
It's-
the companies worked very, very hard.
It's a $1 million increase, and I'm not happy with any increase, but it doesn't seem out of line with the current economy and how things go. And last meeting, I made the motion to accept it, knowing that you were going to work on reducing it. So I'm worried now. I'm concerned for the city. I want, you know, the city's on the hook for this. It's not part of net school spending. So I'm concerned. I'm not looking, I'm looking to work with the city. We want the whole city to function. But I think we made a good decision, and I'm feeling comfortable with the bids we had. And I think you worked on it, and it looks okay. So is it not as feasible? It still isn't as feasible as we'd like it to be. If he's saying 10.2,
Yeah, no, I mean, if I could interject, I'm very pleased as well with the amount of money that Mr. Pacheco and the companies were able to reduce the original budget by, which also raises questions about the original number as well. You know, we purchased this software that was not utilized to craft this bid. I think that's a major issue. So I think what this allows us to do is to go back out with the services we're providing today to students and gives us a year to craft a new bid in conjunction with the providers with the software that makes the most sense for the long term over the next 5 years. It also gives us the ability to look at purchasing the equipment and the capital, which would be the buses, because I've been very weary, as so I know some of my colleagues here are, in bonding through or paying for these buses through a contract that we're not going to own. And I think that's a major, major problem in this bid. So I think that may not be the wrong thing to do, but it also may not be the right thing to do, and I don't think we should be rushed into doing that. So I think the 1 year gives us enough breathing room to really hammer down what exactly this committee and what the school department wants going forward over the next 5 years with transportation. And that's really it. So I agree with you. I'm pleased that they were able to knock that price down by nearly $2 million, but I'm still very wary about the transportation capital costs themselves, as well as the route software not being used to craft the bids.
All right. Well, I like the idea that we would own our own buses. That makes sense to me, right?
Yep.
We don't have to worry about, again, someone else's. They have the luxury of owning new buses now, thanks to Fall River.
That's right. I don't disagree.
Not that it's bad, but
Right.
we're paying all these increasing costs. So I'll make my decision. Thank you for your input.
Thank you. Mr. Martins? And then Mark,
Thank you.
next.
Mr. Pacheco, and before I start, this material that we have, because it's now on the table, is public record. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Now, we have had certain bus companies that we approved the first go-around, like Tremblay Bus.
Yes.
In there. And then there are other recommendations in here for Amaral, Whaling City, and I guess there's one for Fisher
Yes.
in there, and that all adds up to $11.7 million. What you're telling me, well, what you're asking at this point in time, I don't know if this material has gone to the city council or the approval, but inasmuch as these companies perhaps know of their award.
So, Mr. Martins, if I could, the Tremblay's contract, the Tremblay's bid was approved, sent to City Council for a 5-year recommendation for a contract. They approved the 5-year term. That's their responsibility to approve the term of the contract. The contract was never executed, so there is no contract. It was signed by Tremblay's, but not signed on the city side. So the Tremblay's is the only contract, the only document that went to the City Council. The other bids never made it to the City Council.
All right, well, that's good in that. But with the Tremblay contract, is that an enforceable contract, or can be now renegotiated or set out again?
Mr. Martins, it's still in the purchasing office. It hasn't been signed. So there is no executed
So
contract.
there is no contract?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. Now, you mentioned, Mr. Pacheco, that you had some contact with some vendors,
Yes, the low bidders.
and that they made some suggestions,
Yes.
which and they all participated in this freely,
They all were asked if they wanted to come to the table, and they did.
and they did. And
Yes.
they made recommendations for
Yes.
reducing
Yes.
their
If we
particular-
do A, they can do B,
Right.
basically.
Right, absolutely so, in there. Do some of these recommendations implementable?
There was nothing in the room, there was nothing that they had said nor I said that we couldn't do.
You couldn't do?
Right.
Okay. Are there any, I'm trying to think of the extremities of the city, and I guess the furthest one would be in the Copicut area, students coming here.
Yes.
Okay, in there. Is that provided by bus?
There are some routes that we do with our own 7D vans and our own couriers. We do have routes that we do in the reservation, so, and that would continue. The committee not too long ago authorize the spending of 2 more 7D buses. So our intent would be to pick up those outlying routes and bring those in-house so that we can reduce that particular cost.
Okay. All right, we now get to a point where you're using the term buses and 7D.
It's 7D vans. It's all 7D vans. We don't have any buses. We don't own any buses. It's 7D vans.
You don't have buses going out to the Copycut
We,
area?
the companies do. We don't.
Okay, the companies do, but we
Yes.
pay for it.
We are paying for it, yes.
Oh,
What I'm
okay.
saying is the real outliers, the Copacuts, we will be able to do those in-house.
Okay. All of them?
The ones that are going to be the most difficult, yes.
Okay.
The problem is some of those routes get combined, so they pick up, let's say Copacut, then they run in and pick up maybe Blossom Road,
Yeah.
and then they run in and pick up something in the city. That route becomes extremely long, gets
Oh,
real
yeah,
close to
uh-huh.
the hour, and then the same thing on the way out. So some of those students are on the bus for a long time. So the reduction would be to make the direct route out to the Copacut, for instance, and come back, and not have that many stops to reduce that time.
Okay, but that could be done by a 7D?
By a 7D,
van,
yes.
Either our own or contracted?
Or contracted, yes.
Okay, in there. Now, you mentioned that the negotiating of this, or sending it out for bid in there, is that verbatim to what we have now, pushing forward for that 1-year period of time?
Right, so it's not verbatim because we did have to make some adjustments. So routes have changed, and we've added some, subtracted some, so they look very, very similar to the original routes. So,
Well, let me rephrase that then. Understanding that there is, you have to make some changes as time goes on.
yes,
And for the current school year we're talking about, you made some changes.
Yes.
Which is, obviously, you did it for the needs of the school.
Yes.
District. All right. Taking as it is now, then what you're recommending is that be just put from here to over here and change the year.
no, what I'm recommending is that it go out to bid,
Oh, yeah.
and not necessarily the vendors are all going to fall in the same place, but they have the opportunity to bid the document the way they bid it 5 years ago.
Okay, so, yeah, that's a better phraseology than what I had indicated there, that you're taking this contract, what it is right now
Right,
for this school year.
Yes.
And you're photocopying it and sending it out to bid for next school year, and the vendors can then bid on the sections of that particular
that they're
contract.
interested in, yes.
I see. Okay.
And it has, as I said, minor changes, and of course, the contract does say more or less. So if we have to make a reduction, we can make a reduction. If we have to add buses, we can add buses.
That's understood.
Yep.
Right. Thank you very much, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Pacheco, I just want to make sure my numbers are correct. So proposed FY20 transportation, including Tremblay, was 11.9 million?
Yes,
And you were able to negotiate, not with Tremblay, but with the other
about
vendors?
1.8.
1.8. So that puts us at 10.1 for FY20 as it stands
And
now.
mind you, those did come in with some concessions on our side for bell changes.
Okay. But regardless, 10.1, the school department would be all in for 5-year contract with the vendors that you talked to, plus Tremblay, if we were to go forward with that.
Right,
This year, this current fiscal year, we're at 9.2.
yes,
So an increase of about 900,000,
yes.
right? Okay. The contracts as they stand now include cameras, GPS,
The new contracts include a minimum of 3 cameras and GPS, yes.
and the tracking software.
Yeah, the GPS, yeah, will be the tracking.
Is
Yep.
GPS is
Yes,
considered the tracking?
Yes, yes.
If, in the life of that contract, the 5-year contract, in use of the GPS tracking and software, we realize that we don't need the number of buses that we have now. If we were to consolidate the routes further, that would drive down the cost of 10.1.
Yes.
Right, so that doesn't prohibit us if we find savings, because when we use the software, we realize we're running too many buses, we can actually eliminate some of those. That would be a cost savings to the district.
It would. The only thing that that contract does include is it includes a COLA.
Right.
And it, so that it would obviously be in there. There's fuel adjustment, but that's in
What's the
both.
COLA per year?
Minimum of 1.5,
%.
yes.
You say a minimum, is it one of those, it's based on the index?
That's the bottom. That's the bottom, and then the index. Right, exactly.
So 1.1 is the minimum, 1.5 is the
1.5
minimum,
is
but
the
it could go
minimum,
up
but
as
it
high
could
as
go
whatever the index
whatever
is,
the
calls
index
for.
drives, yes.
Okay. And if the committee votes to reject the bids tonight
Yes.
and rebid, we have to rebid everything, right? Special ed and all? Or, I guess I'm trying to figure out where are we with Tremblay? The committee took action, we voted, it's, right now hasn't been signed and executed, but,
So Tremblay's doesn't have a contract until we sign it on our side. Even
Right.
though they signed it and returned it.
hasn't been
It's not an
executed.
executed contract.
Right.
So we don't have any, any obligation other than the fact that we're going to go out to rebid, and the documents don't look the same. So we're not bidding 7Ds the way we did it the last time. We're bidding packages.
right, so we'd be essentially forced to throw out Tremblay's bid and
Yes.
rebid everything.
Yes.
Have we considered what that might cost in terms of an increase on a one-year contract?
I am not,
I know we've been
yeah.
focused on the three vendors and where they were able to come to the table, and I don't know who they are off the top of my head, but I don't know that there's going to be the savings that I think we need to realize in order to make this happen, but we're talking about $900,000 that we're, and is that worth, I guess, to the committee, to the taxpayers, to the parents of the students who are going to ride those buses, is that worth the cameras, the software, so that they know where the bus is, where their kids are on it? I don't like the increase either, but I think before we were talking about 9.2 million to 11.9, which was a significant increase, and now we're talking about $900,000 over the course of 5 years, where even if it was a 1.5 COLA, I'm going to venture to guess that the GPS tracking software is going to yield us an accurate number of buses that we need, and right now, I don't think we know how many we need. And I think that's part of the issue with the contract, is trying to bid. They're trying to bid blind. Do I bid for X amount of buses, and they're not certain either. So my position is that, awarding these contracts and allowing the software to do the work that it was required to do, quite frankly, I think it's going to take a burden off some of the bus contractors, because I don't know they have enough drivers and monitors to put on the buses that they have to run anyway. And so my question is, do we stay the same way for $900,000 with no cameras, no GPS? Still not going to have, well, I guess we could still implement the tracking software and get a better sense at the end of this year. But are we going to realize the savings that we're looking for? And I'm not certain that we're going to do that. Can I just ask a question of, I guess, maybe through the chair or through superintendent to our secretary, just for procedural reasons, can I just find out who voted to approve the Tremblay contract? How that vote went? Does anyone have that information? And also, at the, not last meeting, because the last meeting was a joint meeting, the meeting before that, when we voted to approve the contracts as they were, can I just get who voted on that? The reason I ask is procedurally, at some point tonight, if we're going to change what's already been done, there needs to be a motion to rescind a prior vote. Typically, reconsideration would occur at the very next meeting. We've had a joint meeting since our last meeting, and now this is a sort of separated it by two meetings, so it would need a motion to rescind a prior vote, which would have to be made by someone who voted in the affirmative. So I'm just trying to figure out if we know that, because before we can take any motions, we need to know who voted and how they voted, so.
So, Vice Chair Costa, that information is not at hand at the moment regarding the votes of that prior meeting.
Do those individuals who voted not know what they voted for? Or-
Well,
Yeah, I was not here. I was not present at the meeting, so I didn't take a vote. But I'm sure other members that are here know whether they voted to approve of Tremblay's contract or not.
So Tremblay's was done back in March, right?
March.
March, I believe.
Yeah,
So that one goes back a little further. The one we just took goes back just
2 meetings.
2 meetings ago, which I think was at the end of April, I'm sorry, April's meeting. So I think we did one in March and one in April, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, if members all remember how they voted, that's fine, if we can just get a tally of that, so that, and I guess if the minutes reflect something different, then the vote we take tonight potentially could be in jeopardy if someone made a motion to rescind and
Yeah.
hadn't voted in the affirmative, but I think it may have been a 6-1 vote for Tremblay's, or may have been unanimous for Tremblay's, if I'm not mistaken. And I can't recall off the top of my head, I think it was a 3-2 vote on the remainder. I believe Mr. Agia voted no, Mr. Corey voted no, and I believe myself, Mr. Coogan, and Mr. Hetzler voted yes. I was just looking for some confirmation that if someone had that.
So for the second vote that we're talking about from April for the entirety of the contracts at the 11.9 million, Mr. Aguirre voted no, Mr. Coogan voted yes, Mr. Costa voted yes, Mr. Hetzler voted yes, Mr. Corey voted no, Mr. Martins was absent, and Mayor Correa was absent.
Okay. So it would have to come,
Point of clarification? What was that vote for?
That was for the
Those-
full
the
contract.
full-
That was a vote for the 11.9, I believe.
To
Correct.
approve the 11.9
It wasn't the issues of the contracts.
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the Tremblay vote was 8-1? 6-1, I'm sorry.
6-1.
Yes, Mr. Martin's opposed.
So everyone else in the affirmative except for Mr. Martin. So anyone
On the
Trem- on
Tremblays.
Tremblays.
on
On the
Tremblay's,
Tremblays.
anyone aside
And then
from
on the
Mr.
other
Martins?
one, does someone have the minutes?
Yep.
So was there a vote taken to approve the contracts for the remaining bids? I believe there was one for the total. I just want to make sure that my memory is accurate. If it's not, then I'll go by whatever the minutes say. I'm just,
Yep, so the motion was made by Mr. Hetzler, seconded by Mr. Coogan to refer the fiscal year 2020 annual transportation budget of $11,959,056 of the Fall River Public Schools to the City Council. A roll call showed Mr. Aguirre voted no, Mr. Coogan voted yes, Mr. Costa voted yes, Mr. Hetzler voted yes, Mr. Corey voted no, Mr. Martins was absent, Mayor Correa was absent. It was a 3-2, the motion passed.
So to rescind, Mr. Coogan, Mr. Costa, or Mr. Hetzler has to make the motion.
well, no, not necessarily, Mr. Chair, if I may. If it wasn't specifically on the contracts, then it's a non-issue because we haven't voted to approve the contracts. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, that's fine.
Just procedurally. Was it the number, the
It was the
11.9,
number, it
and
was the
not to
11.9.
accept the regular ed bids?
Yes.
Okay, so that's different.
fine.
So there's a non-issue there. So the only one
Is the
would have to
Tremblay's
be
contract.
Tremblay because that was actually voted on to award.
Is there a motion to rescind that contract?
Question?
Mr. Aguirre, question? Oh, Mr. Vice Chair, do you yield? You still have the floor.
Can I just have 1 second? I just want to make sure I ask
Second, Mr.
my...
Aguirre.
Yeah, may I just one more question?
course.
So, on Tremblay's contract, the one that's been awarded hasn't been executed.
Yes.
What action is necessary in order to get that to be executed? It's out of our hands, correctly?
You've already approved it, so it's not a school committee, it's not a school committee approval.
Right, and the council approved it.
The council approved it, yes.
So, okay. So then if I may, Mr. Chair, if you can, just for information purposes, what's the next step? Your office either signs it or rejects it formally, procedurally?
Yeah, procedurally, we could reject it, we could send it back to council, we could veto it. We've been waiting for this meeting to occur for our next steps. We haven't signed it. There were some questions, you were at the meeting, there were some questions about the procedure of the bids.
Well, right. And from what I understood, the issues were more of a lack of understanding of the bids or confusion with the bids, not necessarily anything that would prohibit the bid to be invalidated by anything legally. That was my takeaway from it. There was a lot of confusion, there was some
I'm
changes.
not going to comment on that, that would have to go to Corporation Counsel or the IG's office. I don't know procedurally whether there was anything that was wrong with it legally.
But as far as the information that I have in discussions that I've had is with your purchasing agent, that there wasn't anything that was flagged as being illegal, that was referred to as issues with it, but when I asked for specifically what those were, there were some issues regarding confusion, language, short notice on responses back from specific questions, a number of amendments that were made. But I didn't hear anything that would invalidate that. But the reason I asked that, let me just be clear that we're going to have to take some action today, and I just want to know where that contract lies in terms of what position your office is going to take, or
Yeah, so
whether it's going to send it back.
I can answer that more directly.
It's out of our hands
Yeah,
now.
I can answer that more directly. So that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Pacheco, but that's one of the special education transportation contracts?
It's the vans, right?
Right,
vans.
so that can be negotiated without bids.
Yes.
Okay, so we had a bid, it came back still higher, although there was a savings, still high. We believe that the entire package, all of the bids should go back out for rebid, and this committee can make a clearer choice at that time after the 1 year. That's our position, that's what we're going to stick to.
So the administration's position on the Tremblay contract would be to not
To
sign
rescind
it?
it,
and
yep,
rescind
rescind
Okay,
it
okay.
tonight.
No, that's fair. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to spot anybody.
No, no,
I'm
I just- yeah,
I
we're
want
just- I
that
just wanna be
information
very-
before I decide on.
Yeah, I just
if
wanna
we're
be
along with
very
everything
clear.
Or just something.
I just want to be
Okay.
very clear on that.
I
and would
appreciate
be
that.
All the contracts going back out for the 1 year.
I appreciate
And
it.
that
Thank you.
contract in particular doesn't need to be bid, you can negotiate directly.
Exactly. Mr. Chairman, just one item. We did want to remove, the district wanted to remove the trips, the
Yes, that's
field
correct.
trip
Yep,
and
we talked about that. the
sports
trips.
runs, because we felt that.
The
that-
sports trips, that was going to be awarded.
Which is the Fisher. The
That
Fisher
will be
bid.
awarded.
Yeah.
And what was that total again? Do you remember?
152,000, I
Oh,
think.
that's right.
I'm
That
not
was a small,
positive.
that was a small
I'm
one
not
for field
positive.
trips and
So we would like to keep that
athletics,
one
right?
active, yes.
Do you
All
need a
right, I
special
yield.
motion for that?
I yield.
You've already approved it, so we
Okay,
just
so
don't
also-
rescind that one.
Okay.
Right.
I yield,
All
Mr.
right,
Chairman.
so we have a little bit of a backup here. Mr. Martins is next, then I'll go to Mr. Corey, Mr. Aguirre, and Ms. Exler.
I think the discussion that we are currently in is basically what I asked earlier in regards to the Tremblay contract, and when I asked, has it gone through all of the approval steps? And I believe your reply was no, and that is no longer a contract under consideration.
It is not, it hasn't
It is
been
not.
signed on the city side. Everything but the city side has been done, right.
Right, okay.
So the contract is
But
not,
then there's
is not
still
executed.
no
It's not
contract.
executed.
There's no contract.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. My second issue with regards to, which I should have asked when I had your attention earlier, with regards to the new bid being everything we currently have, just bring it over here to the next school year.
Right.
My concern is, and I think, well, I'm not going to put words in Mr. Costa's mouth with regards to the buses, But the current buses, the Mass Department of Transportation, which the Registry of Motor Vehicles falls under, inspects every school bus, well, every 2 months, is it?
I'm not sure on the time, but I know they do inspect the buses, yes, absolutely.
But it's quite frequently, okay? I do have some experience with school buses, with regards to, especially with ownership, and I would highly not recommend owning our own school buses, because that is one big hassle. But nevertheless, so that the buses that we are currently transporting our students are indeed inspected by the Mass Department of Transportation, Registry of Motor Vehicles, and that they would not be considered safe if they found something wrong with it.
You're absolutely right.
In there. So these buses are indeed safe.
Yes.
In there. With regards to perhaps a GPS system, all that tells you would be where the bus is at any particular point in time.
Exactly.
It doesn't tell you that, hey, this route is better than that route. It just says that, wait a minute, you took a left turn and you should have taken a right turn.
But basically, the reason why we wanted the GPS was there's an additional module that would be added to the system that would allow parents to pick that up. So if a bus was stuck on the side of the road, if a bus was stuck in traffic, they're waiting for 10 minutes, they stop panicking, we don't know it, we don't know other than making the phone call to the particular dispatcher from that company.
Right.
So the parents would have that access. It's just a peace of mind piece.
Oh, I agree.
for
I
us.
understand that. But the GPS is just to tell you where that bus
Yes.
is at any point in time.
Exactly.
It may even tell you what the speed of that bus is, too.
There could be a bunch of things that
In
sure.
there, depending upon how much software, I guess, to go put into the GPS system in there. But the buses, the current buses that are being used will be part of this new bid package for next year.
If the rebid goes out, yes,
Yes.
the
Okay.
current buses that they're using, I'm assuming every company has the ability to, to buy buses if they still choose to. It's
Oh,
their,
yeah,
but
that's their choice if
but-
they want to
but
do
if
that.
they don't need to,
But
then they would-
As far as the bid is concerned, they, for that 1-year period of time, what they have and what they're using at the present time, having been inspected by the Department of Transportation, is acceptable. We're not
Yes.
making any changes to that.
no company would send us buses that wasn't.
Oh, absolutely. I
So we've
understand
never
that.
had that issue with any of the
Right,
companies.
okay, but I just wanted to ensure that these buses are indeed safe buses.
Yes.
Thank you very much, I yield. And
Thank you.
I'd like to make, was there another speaker?
There's several others.
Okay,
Thank you.
I yield.
Mr. Corey?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ken, first, I want to start out by saying thank you. I know you're working real hard on this issue, and I know you're sweating the details. I appreciate that. It was some time ago where I proposed right from this seat that I may be in favor of having our own fleet of buses, but I'm still speaking out of a little naivete because this is my first term, and I'm getting my feet wet as to what these issues really look like. I did state several times that I am alarmed by the cost increases as projected by these contract bids. And I'm really glad that we're having this special meeting to address that. I do like the idea of having our own fleet. I think that there's a lot of benefits to that. I know it's an extra tier of overhead for the city, but if the administration in the city and the city council think it's a good idea, a good direction to go in, I certainly wouldn't mind exploring it, Mr. Chair. We could also throw in a couple of added services to that. For years, in my work with student and youth, with the organizations I've been involved in through the years, we've always had a void for transportation, proper transportation, especially when it comes to student programming after school and into the early evening hours. And in a way to get kids more involved from one end of the city to the other. we might be able to address that if we had our own fleet and used a couple of maybe 15 passenger vans for enhanced transportation services if a kid's involved in a sports program or a theater program or any of the after-school programs that the schools offer throughout the course of the school year. In any case, I am alarmed by the $2.7 million increase. I appreciate your efforts to lower that. I listened to Vice Chair's comments on $900,000 over the course of 5 years. Maybe something we can absorb, but my bigger question to everybody is, from contract to contract, 5-year period to 5-year period, every time that 5-year period comes around, the costs always escalate, all the time. And this time, we were hit with a $2.9 million increase. That's a no-go for me. So I understand that the new buses coming on board will have to stand up to code. I'm glad about the cameras, the GPS, and I'm looking over here toward, on, I don't know what page it is in our addendum, but factors which affect bid costs. And I know that there are bills in the state legislature right now which will require seat belts and other code factors on buses that are going to continually drive up the costs. And those may be factors that we, if we take on a fleet, also have to consider. All of the code factors that add to the cost per bus, per student, and in our net school spending. So, I don't know, there's a lot to consider. I do like the idea of rejecting this contract, trying to get a 1-year stay, and seeing what we can do moving forward to really revamp this whole effort. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Axel?
A few questions. If we decided to not take action on this tonight, is there any way we could have numbers or a feel for what a 1-year contract is going to look like? Is that something that we could we gather those numbers? Could we contact these bus companies that were looking to extend a 1-year contract in the next few days until next Monday and figure this out?
I'm not sure, I mean, the only thing, in fairness to the bus companies, the 16, half of the increase, 16% or so, is based on items out of their control, which is all the mandates, whether it's state or federal. So at worst-case scenario, you look at the contract you currently have, add 16% to it, and you're going to just cover those bare costs, not including any kind of increase that they would be entitled to. Whether or not they got an increase over the 5 years, we know they didn't, because the contract was stale. I'm stagnant, I'm sorry. So they didn't receive any over the 5 years. So this year, if you just tacked on that small amount, that's the best. I wouldn't feel comfortable sitting down with people who are going to bid and ask them what they think they're going to, you know, I just, and not for any other reason other than the fact that I don't think it's fair to them and me to have all that information. I don't believe that that's clean, a clean way to do the bid. I would rather see the bid go out. Unfortunately, you have two options. So we put the bid out as it was 5 years ago with the changes we made and see what the results are. You can always pull the special ed piece completely out of that, and now you're left with a small portion, $2 million worth of transportation for regular ed that you would have to put out to bid. That is the second option that you have. So you do have a second bite of the apple, even though you put this thing out to bid in early May. Well, it would be middle May before it hits the streets.
All right, so that's not an option. Now, does the city send this, you put this in part of your budget? Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
I think that's also what's driving this. We are putting in $9.3 million in the budget. So it can come back 10, it can come back 11, it can come back 12. We're sending down 9.3, and that's not going to change. So that's where we need to be. And the bus companies that are hearing this, watching this, that's what they need to bid at in total, maximum, in this next bid process. That's what this all comes down to. Because that increase was, number one, I think that it's important to recognize this administration is very uncomfortable financing buses for private contractors that are going to own those buses, and because it's a 5-year contract, they're not financing these buses over 10 years like the city can do. They're financing them over 5 years, which is driving the capital cost up. So they have to pay off all these buses within 5 years of the contract. That's number one. Number two, the 16% increases that Mr. Pacheco talks about, I don't disagree that there are certainly increases, but 16% over 1 year, those increases have been steadily rising. It's not like from year one of the last 5 year to year 5, they didn't see any kind of increases in their insurances, their costs, et cetera. So to go in 1 year, 16%, I don't believe is the case. I think by rebidding the whole thing, knowing that the number needs to be 9.3 for the 1 year is acceptable and very good, a good decision for the committee and the department. Taking the next year to assess every potential option with the root software in place, rebidding this entire package out with the GPSs, with the other software that we need, with the 5 cameras, 4 cameras, and getting exactly how many routes we need and understanding how many buses we need is the most prudent thing to do. Because we cannot lock, I understand the Vice Chairman's point about 900,000, we're splitting hairs now at 900,000 a year. But we're splitting hairs at 900,000 a year, additionally every year for 5 years, at the cost of not truly understanding what we're getting. Right now, we're still out there, we haven't done this route software. We don't know if it would be cheaper to buy our own buses. There's there's still many questions. So I think rebidding the whole thing for 1 year, taking our time to really get this right for the next 5 years is the best decision.
All
But
right.
the strongest point I can make tonight is our budget is done. It was done last week. It has gone to the printer and it has $9.3 million in it.
All right, now, and I'm not sure exactly how this works. You send your budget to the city council, and they vote to approve it. Now, do they have the
They cannot
ability?
vote to increase the budget, so they can only vote to reduce it.
All right, well,
That
personally.
number is not going to change.
Right. I'm hesitant. I don't think that this is going to yield the results that we're looking for. I think that a $900,000 increase, now that we've brought those numbers down, I think it's appropriate. We're asking for some new stuff. We're going to provide some additional security for the students
The
and the
school
buses.
department is more than welcome to turn back $900,000, but that number's not changing in the budget.
Right.
If that number changes, then I have to make cuts. That's the option. So if we can't try this one more time to get that number down, then I have to make cuts. That's the decision.
Right, nobody wants that.
Okay, so then we should try this one more time. That's why we're here tonight.
But I'm not sure that that's the best course of action. So with that, I yield. I'll make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aguirre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a few comments that came out on this. The Tremblay van contract that we approved a while back. If I recall, that was a good deal for the school department in that they accepted transporting everyone. It was very minimal increase, and it also has a clause in there that you could lower it and get some savings once the software's up and running anyway over the course of those 5 years. Is
Yes.
that accurate?
Yes.
So I think, quite frankly, I'm not sure why that's not done. And the committee has received zero information. I'll speak for myself. I've received zero information from anyone related to that contract being a problem. If anyone asked me before I came into this meeting, what's the status of the transportation, I would have said, we voted on the vans, now we know that's a decent thing, let's put that in our pocket, we know we have that. I come here now and I find out we don't have it for the first time here at the meeting. That's a little disheartening, just as a general school committee member opinion. The other thing is the specifications related to, somebody called the IG, Inspector General.
I did.
Did you ask the IG if changing the routes the way we did is doable?
And the routes didn't come up in conversation. The only thing I was concerned with was the question that I was asked, and that was to increase the contract by 1 year, was the only question I asked the IG's office. And they said if it's not written in the contract that you can increase it beyond the 5 years, then you cannot increase it.
So that was on the old contract? So you
Which
had
is
asked
what we were
questions on
asking.
the old contract?
Which is what we were asking. That's the only question that I had to ask, because everything else is a rebid. If I'm not, extending the old contract, then it just becomes a rebid.
Yeah, I personally think that, as I mentioned at the last meeting, putting out a bid for X amount of buses, and then before we even get to anything, people either bid or didn't bid based on the number of buses that were required. to say then we're cutting out 5 or 10 buses like that, as I said at the last meeting, I think that's changing the specifications of, and the scope of a bid. I don't think that, if there was a protest, I would bet they're going to get thrown out.
It's more or less.
Just-
The contract was written more or less. We have no obligation to provide them to, if we're bidding 78 buses and we reduce that down to 79, reduce it up to 79 or down to 77, there's no obligation on our side. It's more or less.
Yeah, that's your opinion. I'm just giving you my opinion.
No, I understand.
The, talking about the money and the vendors, the current, and I don't have the information because we've had so much information regurgitated, but if you could, either by memory or know, how many vendors are doing the special ed and how many are doing the regular ed now?
I want to say that my best guess is that everyone has a hand in just about everything, but I'm not positive, so I would have to
A
look at
handful,
that.
4 or 5, is that, in my mind?
No, I
I'm
mean a
thinking-
hand in it. So I'm saying basically, I think that everyone crosses those two disciplines, whether it's special ed or regular ed. I'm
and
not
it's,
positive,
How
though.
many vendors total out of both, is it?
It's,
Mr. Labrie told us,
so there's 5 vendors, and I don't want to say it's equal because there are some vendors who had
Right.
bigger pieces.
so if we did the special ed, which is non-bid,
Yes.
do you have to go to the vendor who had a bid, or is it totally from scratch? You could say, his company...
If you're going to, if the bids are going to be thrown out,
Yep.
then we're starting as if we never did anything.
And you could, in the special ed, you could negotiate, I need 10 buses from his company, 10 from mine, 10 from, you could do that as part of the legal process.
Right, or we could just say we want all the buses from one place.
Correct. So, my last point on this would be, I'm of the belief that we need to get some busing in place for next year. You talked about the field trips, which I do think we need to vote on today, because I don't think we voted on that last year. Maybe we did.
You did not.
So we would need to vote on that little piece. So I operate from the stance of, let's try and keep what we know now, because we got a school year starting in a few months. I think the field trips we should keep. I don't think that's it's a short amount of money. The vans, I don't think we should be throwing out. I think we should keep the vans because I think it's been, putting all those in one, to Mr. Pacheco's point, was a smart thing to do for reductions and tiering and the like. I think that's a smart thing to do. I don't think we should put that, we should sign that so we get that locked in. The special education, I think we should throw the bids out and negotiate with all current vendors that have worked in this district and were good to this district for a small increase. That would leave us with one issue of 37 buses for the next year in this regular education, which you already said you cut down to.
There was cuts, yes, there was.
I don't know how many, but it was-
I don't know the exact amount.
Let's say it was
but-
full, it was only 37 buses. It wasn't the whole 77 buses. That would leave us the only unknown if we left here tonight with one issue that you got to come back to us on Monday for in the regular ed, 37 buses. I think we should go and lock in the other pieces and charge you or the superintendent or whoever in the school department to negotiate with the special education folks. Let's lock this stuff in so we minimize our risk for the next year and then go from there. And then the software should be up and running. All that stuff, the cuts and all that, changing the start times and end times, the things that you talked about agreeing to, I don't know any of that because I haven't heard it other than from today. But those are also things that are going to affect us and things that we would have to vote on at some point about changing the start and end times and the like.
And we do have some
Maybe
deadlines on
contractual
that.
stuff,
Yeah, we do have some deadlines.
So that's another issue that I think we should lock in what we can for the current year. And with that being said, I make a motion that we reject both the regular education and the special education bids.
Make a motion to reject both special ed and regular education. Does that include the Trembley's contract,
No.
special education?
No,
So-
two separate.
Mr. Chairman, if I just interrupt for 1 second.
Sure.
That's the yellow bus service, not the vans, is what he's referring to, yellow
Yeah,
bus.
so not the vans for Trembley's.
Exactly, it's the yellow
Now,
bus
just on
service.
that, I don't disagree with your.
I didn't hear, sorry, I didn't hear you.
I don't disagree with your motion, Mr. Aguirre. The only question, and just want to bring this to light, I don't know if it's prudent to go out for the 5-year right now on just one of these when we're seeking a 1 year, because If we reject them all, we still have the ability to do the 1 year, which is what we're here to do tonight. That's the direction I think we were heading in. And it allows us the flexibility to go out again within the year, after the root software has been implemented, and put out again all these different packages. So I don't think awarding one 5-year contract and going back out for all the others is the most prudent thing to do. I know I'm not going to leave this meeting and go and sign that contract until I see the other bids back. That's the other thing, because at, what is it, 4.9, is that the number on Tremblay's?
4.999.
4.9
Yes, 5 million.
minus 9.3 allows 4.4 million amongst all the other contracts. So until I see the other bids back, I can't sign that Tremblay's contract. So I'm okay if that's the vote that's taken, but I just want to make it abundantly clear that that contract will not be signed with Tremblay's and executed until I see the remaining bids come back, if that's what the committee decides to do. Now, keep in mind, Tremblay's is the only one that's going to have a 5-year, and the remaining will only be bidding on a 1-year. I don't know how that affects the process, but I don't know if it's a positive or negative, and I won't venture to guess which one it is, as I'm not the expert on that topic. So I just want the committee to be forewarned. Ms. Jaguar, follow-up?
Yeah, just on that Tremblay issue, I think early on in the discussion with the consultant and everyone, we sort of put the 7D vans in a totally separate category and the big yellow buses in another one. That's the only reason why I'm suggesting. When we looked at the data and the information that came in, their bid was within $200,000 of the other, and the amount per van was reasonable, I think quite reasonable, that we could put that out 10 more times, and I'm not sure we were going to get somebody to commit to do the things that Mr. Pacheco asked. So I'm not worried about it as much, because the yellow buses was really the issue. That's why I think it was a separate thing. The other thing I would like to do is just get to the rejection of these two so that we can move on. That's an issue. The busing contract we can talk about next week. But ultimately, I think that it's an issue that we need to start locking in some things for next year, because time is going by. The 9.3 issue that you speak about, Mayor, I get what you're saying, that that's the amount of money. But the flip side of it is, if the bids come back, even if we change them and they're at 10.3, the city is on the hook for the transportation. It's a non-net school spending eligible item. So I don't think this is what you want to say right now, but correct me if I'm wrong. But if the bids come in at 10.3, are you going to cut $1 million from the school department? I don't think that's what you want to do. I don't think that's what you're saying.
I'm being very clear.
I'm just asking just so that we're all on the same page.
It's in the budget at 9.3.
Yep.
I'm not going to play politics about it. I'm not going to say I'm going to cut the school department or not. We will make the decisions that are necessary if the bids do not come back at 9.3, no matter how difficult those decisions are.
That's fine. My only concern with that is, and I've been sitting on this board over these bids, advocating for the city side to say they can't afford it. So I'm not looking at, and I'm not trying to politically hit you with it or anything. I'm just trying to put out facts and reality.
Absolutely.
If you commit to that 9.3 is not going to change. And if the bids come back at 10.3, or even what Mr. Pacheco had said, I think it came out to 10.1 or something. If that number is not going to change, the only way to you to get that money is to cut the school department. I'll say it, that's just a fact. And
you're correct.
I think that that's not necessarily the right thing to do for the schools. I don't think it's the right thing to do overall in the city. So I would urge that you keep an open mind on that, because I don't think that we can, there's no possible way we can transport the kids under the scenarios that we have, even with us all busting our butts to try and do what we can do right now to get these bids down, to guarantee it's under 9.3 million. And I wouldn't want to see the cut below to the school department for the money that we have.
And I don't want to see that either. That's why we're here tonight, and that's why we've all, the city and Mr. Pacheco and the school department and this committee has worked very hard to get this right. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I think if
I
we
just
don't,
wanted to point out the 9.3, that's my concern.
I agree, and I
but
think
I
if
do
we
urge
don't,
my colleagues to reject both bids so we can move on.
okay, there's a motion on the table to reject both bids.
Just a point
On
of
the motion,
information
Mr.
first.
Vice Chair.
Just a point of information. So does it include Tremblay's that we previously voted on?
The motion?
So that's going to be separate?
That's going to be separate. The vans and that Trembley's contract will be separate from this motion.
From the motion.
So that'll remain. So in the event that these other bids come in and it's over 9.3, we're going to have to go then take a vote to throw out Tremblay's to rebid that? Because then we're further down the road.
Yeah.
And now we're going to say, okay, now we need to throw out Tremblay's bid, but now we need to bid 70 vans.
I would
That's
go
the
back to
question.
I would go back to the chairman's statement that the contract is not going to be signed until all the bids are in. So there won't be a contract for Tremblay's until we know exactly what we're spending.
Okay. I yield.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Second? Okay, there is a second. Comments, questions on the motion? This is again to reject the, not Trembley's contracts. They would be
Yep,
the
yellow bus.
the yellow buses. With the exception, I mean, Mr. Aguirre, would you entertain an amendment just to, with the exception of the field trips as well, right?
That's on a separate, like,
You're
we
gonna
would have to
make
take a separate vote, I
motion.
think, on
Okay.
that personally.
Okay. Questions on the motion? Mr. Martins?
I guess I'm a little confused with regards to the comments of Mr. Aguirre, in that there's no such thing, the attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, no such thing as negotiating, which is a term that was used frequently, with the bus companies. You either put out for bid, and then they have to bid on whatever you put out. But you can't, I don't think you can negotiate with the bus companies for what it would be in there. And perhaps that was a term that Mr. Aguirre used, but I think it should be clarified that the rebidding process is on whatever Mr. Pacheco comes up with and his people that work with him, his superintendent, in regards to what's going to be on the subsequent one-year contract.
Can I respond?
Mr. Martins yielded. Mr. Aguirre?
So just in response to that, Mr. Martins, we had just previously asked that question to Mr. Pacheco. And in this, if we rejected these bids, the special education buses, which is the largest piece, almost $5 million, they do not have to bid those pieces. Mr. Pacheco could go to the vendors individually. They don't have to be the way we went out originally here. They can be just, he goes to the vendors and says, you gave us 15 buses this year, we need 15 next year, what's your price? And then that's what we're calling a negotiation. But he can go directly to them. He does not need to go out to bid for the special ed portion, which is $5 million. The other piece is $2.6 million, which is a smaller amount that we would have to bid. So our exposure, as far as that goes, would be very limited at the, for the special ed, the $5 million piece. If I hope that clarifies. If I did a bad job, please, Mr. Pacheco.
Special ed is 30B exempt.
I'd like to have an opinion from the attorney.
You yield, Mr. Aguirre?
Yes, I yield. Thank you.
Attorney Saad?
Okay. Mr. Mons, I haven't reviewed the bids or the bidding process. This is something that is handled on the city side with respect to the purchasing department. They have discussed this, my understanding is discussed this with Mr. Pacheco, and that a determination has been made that it is legal. My understanding is that the contract negotiations are with the low bidder anyhow.
Yes.
So that it's not a situation where you're substantially changing the bid offered itself, but in terms of getting the lowest possible bidder and even doing better than that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But the lowest, you're changing the, from what I understand what's being happening here, you're changing the, you're saying, look, I want whatever we're doing right now on those areas, and then, you know, how much is each company going to bid for doing that issue in there? If negotiations is appropriate, that's fine, but I didn't think that it would be legal to be able to say, well, okay, you wanted to provide this for X number of dollars, but other company says, why can you go down lower than that? You know, I'm looking to replace the roof on my house. I could call, but that's a private issue. I can call various companies and say how much, And, well, I can get it from ABC Company for, you know, $1,000 less. Can you go down that amount more in there? I don't know, is that what can be done?
Mr. Martins, I think that the major issue would be is if it was not the lowest bidder, and then you accepted that bid as the most responsible bidder, and then negotiated down to a price that was lower. I think that would be a concern. The second thing would be if, in fact, what the actual bid was on was substantially changed, that is also a concern. My understanding is, and again, I haven't reviewed the bids, but according to purchasing, what has been discussed, is the fact that everyone based on the same items. The lowest bidders, the items they bid on is not substantially changing, but the bid price has been lowered. And again, not having reviewed it is one thing, but I can understand the process and understand the decision on the city side that it would be correct.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Mr. Coogan?
Yeah, Kenny, the cutouts that Kevin's talking about are going to leave us solely with negotiating for 37 regular ed buses?
37 regular ed bus, it's going to be negotiating for the special ed buses and bidding for the yellow bus regular ed transportation.
How many sped buses are there? You don't know?
It's in your
I got
document,
it.
the
Kevin's,
special ed buses.
In-district special ed transportation, 34 buses. So it's going to be 34 and 37.
Right.
And the special ed buses hold how many kids?
All depends on what routes. We have a variety of sizes. They're all yellow buses, though.
Are they full buses or are they the small ones, the 15s and the
Vans.
10?
Well, the vans are the 7Ds, so the vans are only, that's the Tremblay side. This is outside of Tremblay side.
Well, I'm totally feeling bad that we have to go through all this work again if we end up voting to do this. It's my position that I don't believe, I mean, I know if the mayor has to do cuts because he's reduced funds for the city, that's on him, but I don't believe you can go into negotiations saying no matter what happens, no matter what goes on with minimum wage increases, insurance, or anything, it's not going a penny over 9.3 million. I've never heard of anything like that because I believe all of our public service workers get raises. I believe budgets do go up. I was never happy with the jump we got hit with here, but I don't believe for a second that it's not going to be over 9.3 million. And if it's his job to recommend the cuts he wants to make, but it's my position that you can't go into negotiations saying no matter what happens, we're not going to go a penny over 9.3 million. I don't know how that works because he already put it in the budget, but I don't know what that means. He's going to have to play around with it, and he can also give us a list of the things he wants to cut. But I'm not sure till we do the vote on which way I'm going to go on this one.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Mr. Aguirre.
So just a point of clarification to Attorney Assad's answers to Mr. Martins. I believe Mr. Martins was just asking, if we threw the bids out and we were starting from scratch, could we go to the vendors that we, as I suggested, and work with them based on what they did last year and without bids or anything like that? Could that be done? I think that was the question that Mr. Martins asked to Mr. Attorney Assad.
Attorney Assad.
Yeah, again, Mr. Aguirre, I haven't reviewed the bids or the process that has been discussed over here, so all I can do is give you what the general rules are. And with respect to having issues with the IG and with respect to bids not being accepted or working together with the contractors, the main thing is the issues come out when it's not the low bidder, but it's someone who bids higher, gets the bid, and then reduces the price somewhat. That is an issue, but in this particular case, that's not the issue. The issue is that the low bidders are the ones who are actually
that's not what I'm
lowering
asking.
the bid. But as far as the question about a specific,
I'm saying if there's no bids whatsoever.
say it again?
If there's no bids whatsoever,
Yeah.
Mr. Pacheco has said that this is not 30B required, special ed transportation. In the past, this district, Fall River, has gone out with the vendors that had currently bid 20 buses this year. You go to that vendor and you say, we need the same 20 buses, what can we do for an increase? Try and hold a line on it, sharpen your pencil, whatever you want to say. They get the one-year contract that way. That's what I'm talking about, that can be done. And Mr. Pacheco, I asked you that before and you said correct. Am I still correct?
Only on the special ed buses.
Correct.
Yes.
So the question, I think what Mr. Martins is trying to get to, or he was asking was, if we vote, as I'm recommending and hoping that you do, and throw this out, how do we get our special education students transported for September? And the easiest way to do that is for 1 year for you to go out and negotiate with those individual vendors like we've done in the past. I just want to make sure that Mr. Martins knows and my colleagues know that that has been done in the past. That is, as far as I know, legal, and it's helped us to hold a line when we have had a volatile economy, budget cuts. The vendors have actually stepped up and done very little increases. I think that's the important piece to say, if we vote this down today and vote this budget out, Mr. Pacheco could, by Monday, I'm not trying to tell you you're not busy, but he could, in essence, go out and get, a number from those folks on Monday to come back and say, you know what, we got our 34 buses in sped to do it like we did this year with a 10% increase instead of a 33% increase. Just throwing numbers out there. That potentially could happen, which is why I'm asking that we get this done and start locking in some vendors and locking in some transportation for kids. We're going out with we're really risky if we don't do something. We can't afford the full numbers. I'm not sure we can get to the mayor's number, but we got to do something, guys. So I ask you to please consider throwing these out. I yield.
Okay, roll call. Oh, Mr. Costa.
Just one last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What was our sped transportation last year, FY18?
Around 6.
Around 6 million? What is it this year?
You'd have 4. You'd have 5 with Tremblay's. And
No, I'm not talking about 20. I'm talking about currently, FY19. FY18 was 6. What's FY19?
pretty close to the same.
Even flat? A little bit higher?
Yep.
And you're predicting, as Mr. Aguirre suggested, that if we go out and do this, that we can secure bids for sped at the same amount without any increase?
No, I think the question was back to Mr. Martin's question, and the only way I'd say that is, Mr. Martin, if I'm negotiating with 5 companies, I'm not telling each company what the other one did. All I'm saying to you is give me the best price on X amount of buses doing these routes. And then I take those 5 prices, and that's the negotiation. I've asked each one of them to come up with the price. The low bidder is the low bidder. At the end of all of this, the conversation is not pitting one against the other. The conversation is strictly, give me your best price. What the exemption from 30B allows is that we're not going to that formal process, which is the 2 weeks, the time on the street, the opening of the bids and that process. It saves us a little bit of time, and as Mr. Aguirre said, it gets us set up for next year. That's the only piece of this, but it's not a negotiation that's going to be pitting one against another.
With respect to the sped transportation, though, but it's my understanding that sped transportation has gone up over the years. Is that correct?
I think it has sheer numbers.
Right.
The usage,
I
yes.
just want to make that clear, because maybe I misunderstood Mr. Aguirre, but he was and again, I don't speak for him, but I thought the comment he just made was that we could go out and there hasn't been that much of an increase in sped transportation. But there has been. It's gone up every year. Right. So shouldn't it be anticipated that for 20 it's going to go up again? Based on the volume, we know how many sped students we have when we transport, right? Okay, all right. I yield.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Mr. Aguirre.
So, Mr. Almeida, could you come up to the podium? So in relation to the comment that I had made, just to try and point out some clarifications. In the past, not this last contract, when we had to go out for 1 year and negotiate with special ed, as I had indicated, has that ever happened?
In my tenure here, it has not happened,
How long have you been here?
since 2011.
So you've only had 5-year contracts?
I had a 3-year and I had a 5-year in the
Right,
time
so-
frame that I've been here.
So the numbers that we have, I predate you, I guess I'm a little older than you on that, but it was the case that that would happen, and it was a small increase. The numbers for the current year, though, when we compared, like, what is special ed, what is the increase overall in the current bids? I believe it was 2.6 million, correct? Basically 9 million to 11.6 or 11.7,
Correct.
something along those lines.
In total, yes.
So out of that 2.6 million, the regular education transportation, which Mr. Labrie and you might have said this at the last meeting, went up by 1.6 million. Of that 2.6 million was the regular ed transportation. The buses, the vans, I think, went up by 350,000 thereabouts or something along those lines. So that's $2 million out of the $2.6 million increase was for the regular ed and the vans. So that leaves the other contract, which we have for the yellow buses, that is now at 4.6 million for $600,000 increase. Am I off?
Well, it sounds accurate.
Sounds accurate.
Yes.
So that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that the special ed is almost the 5 million, and if we went and negotiated with these folks without a lot of those extras and just to say, we want to keep these things going for one more year until we can get our feet under us, I can't imagine them coming in a lot higher than that. If anything, maybe lower with some tiering. So I don't think that the numbers are that far off from what I suggested, that if we piece this together, the majority is going to be done. If we did negotiate with the SPED, if we did the vans and we did the field trips. Am I off? Am I way off base, or?
Well, I think the non-bid piece is a larger piece than the regular ed, so if you've already got what you have committed, you have a smaller portion left to go out.
Right. I agree. Thank you, Mr. Almeida. So I just think that it's the right thing to do. I just wanted to clarify that I'm not making it up that this happened. It definitely did. Sorry to go back too many years, but I definitely think it can happen again. And like I said, I urge my colleagues to vote. I yield. Thank you.
Superintendent?
I just want a clarifying question, to clear up some information for me personally. The Tremblay contract is the out-of-district vans and district,
It's both.
right?
It's both.
If that contract were awarded, and that's a 5-year, and the others went out to bid, is there enough capacity in the other market to be able to cover all the other buses for 1 year?
I'm not sure if you pull the, we would have to look at the specs that we currently wrote, the new ones that we were going to present on Monday. So we would have to look at those specs and pull out all of the vans out of that spec. And then the capacity, at that point, we would be able to see if any company had the capacity to do that. But bidding it piecemeal anyway is going to allow these companies to still bid. I'm just not sure if anybody has, without actually pulling that apart, I'm not sure if they have that capacity.
Right, so I guess my question is, if the Tremblay contract were awarded, that does nothing to hurt our ability to have enough buses to run for next year?
If the Tremblay bus contract what I'm thinking is that if everything is out, and you're going back to a process that we know we're capable of in September, because all of the companies will take a small piece
Right.
and bid that for a 1-year contract. If the Tremblay piece stays in, I don't know what it looks like as a standalone with the separate yellow bus transportation for SPED, yellow bus transportation for regular ed. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know if any one company could do it, but I'm sure that there would be, if that was split up, you could probably get those bids too. But it's not as cut and dry as the other piece, with all the bids out.
Okay, good. Superintendent?
I'm
Yield?
good, yeah, thank you.
Okay, roll call.
Mr.
Will you repeat the motion, please?
to reject both regular and special education transportation bids, the yellow buses.
Have discussion?
Mr. Martins?
The Tremblay bus is all sped,
Yes.
that
In
contract?
and out of district, yes.
In and out of
Vans,
district, all
yes.
sped for
Vans.
basically $5 million.
Vans, yes.
Tremblay vans.
Essentially, nothing will change on that, Mr. Martins.
Sorry?
Essentially, nothing will change on the Tremblay's contract. It hasn't been signed, it will not be signed until we see the remaining bids if this motion and vote is successful.
Okay. I yield, thank you.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Coogan?
No.
Mr. Costa?
No.
Mr. Hetzler?
No.
Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
No.
Mayor Correa?
Yes. Motion doesn't carry, I believe.
3 yeses and 4 noes.
Okay, so the bids have not been rejected. Is there another motion on the table? Mr. Aguirre?
Question on the Tremblay vans. So that's in the city, went to the city council for what reason?
For the five-year contract term.
And if it was 6 years, it would have any 5 or more? Is that the
Correct.
language in it? So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the superintendent and the transportation coordinator, Mr. Pacheco, to negotiate a 4-year contract with Tremblay's. Because we need to get some transportation here.
You can't do that. You can't do that. That's changing the bid spec.
Right. And they bid on a 5-year contract, so the contract is 5 years.
You'd have to reject the contract.
The contract went to the city council because it's a 5-year contract, and all departments have the ability to approve a 3-year contract without city council approval. Anything above a 3, it has to go to city council. So it was bid out as a 5-year contract, and obviously their capital costs were put in as a 5-year as opposed to a 3. So I'm not sure, and that would definitely be a change in the bid.
You don't think this is an issue? As the
What-
guy in
what is
charge
an
of
issue?
transportation, you don't think it's an issue that right now we have $5 million worth of out-of-district special ed vans in limbo?
It's not in limbo. It's ready to go. It just hasn't been signed until we understand where transportation costs are. We're being prudent.
I just asked the question to Mr.
Mr.
Pacheco.
Aguirre, I think the whole thing is a problem. It's not, I'm not going to, you know, I'm serving here at the will of everyone, but I'm going to tell you that I'm not comfortable in May not having buses ready for September. So that's my comfort zone. However we split this thing up, I'm not going to be comfortable until I have all the buses lined up for at least 1 more year. Would I like them for 5? Absolutely, because I don't think that this kind of torture should happen every year.
It sounds like you think this is a mess, and I would concur with that. With that, I yield.
Mr. Costa?
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Pacheco? I know you're out of answers probably at this point, but, so, is there anything that prohibits you from going back? So you met with 3 of the 3 low bidders,
Yes.
and you were able to save $1.8 million with their assistance. Are you able to go back, and I know negotiations not 30B with Tremblay, but are you able to go back to them and have a conversation with them about the $4.9 million that
We
they
had the
proposed?
conversation with them already. Their bid is already $500,000 lower than what we were doing this current year, last year also. That conversation happened real short.
Mm-hmm.
None of it is going to be able to be negotiated without the
Right.
full routing.
So I raised that question because the mayor's indicated his budget includes $9.3 million. And Tremblay's contract hasn't been signed yet. So if we don't get to 9.3, Tremblay's contract for 4.9 is not getting signed, and neither are the others. So is it worth a conversation with Tremblay to see if working with them to do additional tiering, bell schedules, whatever, I know it's sped transportation, but is it possible to have a conversation with them to see if, like others, and I know you said they're already $500,000 under, but we're talking about $900,000 from where we are now at 10.1 and where the mayor's number is at 9.3. And so I don't know if it's worth a conversation with Tremblay to explain that this is the situation we're in. Your contract has not been executed yet at 4.9. The mayor submitted a bid of 9.3. Is there a way within your budget for special ed 70 vans that you're able to, shoot us a better number? And I don't know the answer to that. But if he comes back and says, hey, listen, I can cobble out X amount of dollars, that gets us closer to 9.3, and the $900,000 gap gets smaller.
I think anything's possible.
So
I mean,
I-
negotiations are negotiations, so I think anything's possible. Like I said, he had already dropped. I don't know what his
Well, I
ability
think
is
some
to
of the
move
conversation has changed
anymore.
since probably the time you
It
had the
has,
conversation with him.
absolutely.
We know now what's budgeted. It went to the printer, if I heard correctly, so it's in there. And so that's the number. And so we either get to that number, or we approve a number that's not that number, and then the mayor's going to have to look within his municipal budget to decide what areas he's going to propose for cuts. And I don't want to play that back and forth, but it sounds like that's, we're all in on that. So I just suggest that if you have the conversation with Tremblay, maybe you can, come back on Monday and let us know what the decision is on Tremblay, and we can make a decision as to whether or not we want to move forward in the same direction or not. But I don't think we're that far off. We're getting closer. The question is Tremblay able to do something? If they are, great. If they're not, is there another company that's able to? Because that contract hasn't been awarded. It's 30B, it doesn't require a bid. So could you contact 2 or 3 vendors who may together have the capacity to do it for less than 4.9?
And that's the questions we don't know, and that's why it should be rebid. That's what we're here for.
Not the 4.9, we know what that is. We haven't taken any
We don't know if
action on
somebody could do it cheaper.
Well, we haven't taken any action on Tremblay. What I'm suggesting is that if that contract hasn't been executed yet, we can go back to Tremblay as being the lowest bid, responsible bidder for the last round of specs that went out, see if they can do something. If they can't, then talk to the other vendors who maybe as a result of not getting bids on other work can cobble together special ed work.
The only thing is I can't negotiate until we throw the bid out. So I can't talk to the other bidders. I can talk to Tremblay. So I can have the conversation with Tremblay, because we didn't go the 30B exemption route. We went 30B regular bid
Oh,
for
all
Tremblay's.
right.
So
Even
we're
though it
in
was
that-
special ed.
Even though it was special ed.
And it wasn't required. We didn't
It
have
wasn't
to.
required,
We didn't
but
have to
we
go. But
put it
because we
all
did,
out.
we have to.
Right.
Okay, I
So,
understand. That's
yeah.
different then.
Yeah.
So the
We can talk to Tremblay's
Right.
further, but I can't
Talk
go
to
to
others
anyone else.
until we throw that bid out.
Exactly.
I got it. All right. I yield. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's important to recap, because certainly I don't want anybody to perceive the situation the city is in as a hard line that is not negotiable. What you have to keep in mind is, let's roll the clocks back. When we hired a consultant for transportation, and when we decided to purchase Root Software, this committee was told that these numbers were going to come in at least at the same amount or lower. The city is not, no one, whether it's a household, whether it's the police, the fire department, no one expects a 35% increase in 1 year, and the city should not be expected, nor the taxpayers expected, to make up that 35% difference in the 1 year. What we're trying to do is have a responsible contract that is a long-term 5-year contract. That is why I'm very hesitant in signing anything at these numbers. All it took was Mr. Pacheco going back to save $1.8 million. That leads me to believe there's still potentially fat, there's still potentially routes that need to be reevaluated, there's still potentially software that needs to be negotiated to make this bid a lower, more sustainable bid for future transportation numbers. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I think rebidding it, as some of my colleagues here have stated, is a good and prudent decision to do at this time. That's really what this comes down to. I don't want anybody to perceive that we're just throwing an arbitrary number and saying we're sticking to it. This committee was told that through those processes and through this new bid that we were going to see a savings. Now, we've gone back to a few of the lowest bidders, and we've somehow carved out $1.8 million. That's not chump change. That's a lot of money. What are those other bidders that did not have that opportunity able to do? We'll never know unless we rebid. And that's why I think it's the responsible thing to do, to rebid and get new numbers and go out 1 year and really assess what we want to do for a 5-year contract with exactly the amount of routes, with exactly the type of stuff that we want to see in these buses. Mr. Aguirre?
Mr. Pacheco, did you say, I want to say you told the vice chair that you went out for the vans, was a 30B regular ed, like that was the process?
All of the bids were 30B,
Yep, 30B. And how many people bid on the vans? Was it only Tremblay's?
only Tremblay's.
So that would make the reason why you can talk to them.
They were the winning bidder.
They were
They were the low bidder, right, sole bidder,
so
right.
The, I know we keep talking about the savings, so we get the number 11.9, 11.6, whatever it was. And
11.9.
today, we're being thrown around a number of $1.8 million in savings. Can you articulate where that went and which contracts were, like, a list of how we got to that 1.8 million?
Close to 900,000 from from special ed, yellow, and we had about 6 at 6 or a little over 6 from regular ed, and the remainder was with Tremblay's.
So you already went to Tremblay's to get some down,
At the beginning, yes,
so a couple 100,000?
right.
And what would that be? Is it just in
Basically,
low-end
it was
routes?
just, it was roots and some of the tiering that were obviously, there was very little tiering going on right now. So the tiering is possible because we keep everything in silos. And as long as they're in a silo, we can say, you're going to go from this school to this school. And again, with a lot of negotiation on our part with changing of bell schedules. So nothing happens unless the bell schedules work.
Right, which is a whole process for you to go through to have that done.
And I have a time frame in that, too.
Yeah, that's not a guarantee.
It's a guarantee if I can get it done in an amount of time and I follow the contract. I do have parameters in the contract that allow us to do some of that negotiation, but it still is a contractual item.
Yeah, so most of it is in tiering,
Most of it is tiering.
so you would eliminate busing. Yeah. So the regular ed come out to like $70,000 a bus, the way that I just divided the numbers up. So if they're cutting 600,000, they cut 9 buses, 8 buses, and that's where we get the money.
Right.
I think it's prudent to get a report of something so we can go on, because I'm in the dock still. We don't want to throw the bids out. We know already we could have, 900K in sped, we already just now decided that we could take off. But by rejecting the bid and going out to negotiate, we don't think we could have saved the 900K with hearing. So it's just too much information that's just coming out at the, when I say it's a mess, I mean in everything. Because we've missed some deadlines, we've missed some things that we should have done with the tiering and the software and this to that, but it just keeps on adding. And I don't have anything certain to go on. And I'm going to leave here tonight as just speaking for myself, and we're going to have no transportation in place whatsoever. And that just really bothers me. We have to transport kids. It's the law. They got to get to school. And here we are in May, and we still don't have any, basically. And I'm just real worried about it. I have no further suggestions to my colleagues that voted, to go and not throw the bids out. Then come up with something. Call on you to come up with something, because I can keep on taking this microphone and keep saying the same damn thing over and over. It ain't going to change. You guys voted it down, so be it. Now let's step up and tell us what we're going to do. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to reject all bids and rebid in accordance with the rebidding discussion of this evening.
Is there a second?
We just took that vote.
No, this is all rejection.
Yeah, we need a rescission on that. We just took that vote. Didn't we just take a vote to reject?
Took a vote to reject. Not all bids.
Second.
Second. So the vote is to reject all bids,
Include Tremblay's?
including Tremblay's, and rebid all of them. The motion is made on the floor, it's been seconded. Questions, comments? Mr. Hexler?
I don't think it's a good idea, for a few reasons. We have this, I know it's 900,000 over right now, where we wanted it to be. And I know
could
that's
be more than
800,000 over where the city would like it to be. I think that there's still room for progress. I think that, especially when we're looking at some of the special ed out of district, we can keep provide more services in district, maybe reduce the cost of transportation and tuition. I mean, there's a way here to come up with some more savings, I'm sure, and over time, maybe even more savings with the software implemented. So I'm going to be a no vote as far as rejecting them, but I mean, and then to say only adding $100,000 on the city side, I mean, that doesn't even make sense. If I was putting together a budget, we know costs rise, but just $100,000 on something that size doesn't really make sense.
It also doesn't make sense to publicly tell people how much you're going to spend on transportation and then rebid and tell them exactly the number. We're not going to sit here and put in our highest price. We're going to put our lowest, and we're going to see what the bids come back at. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. I'm not going to throw out, hey, the city's willing to spend $10 million on transportation on next budget, because every single dollar that I spend towards transportation is $1 from police, is $1 from fire, is $1 from schools. Okay, so we need to rebid this entire proposal and see where they come back in at. If they come back in higher, so be it for the 1 year. Then we got to figure it out.
So that's a gamble, and so I feel more comfortable seeing if we can still work within that $900,000 difference that we have right now, instead of taking the gamble of.
Okay, so you're willing then, so what you're saying, because it's not a gamble. We're talking about two different bids. A bid for a 1 year is bidding what we currently have. Accepting the 10.1, which is maybe not 10.1, we're not sure. I haven't seen a solid document that says, hey, the new bid's at 10.1. These have been discussions that Mr. Pacheco has had. So that would mean that we're going to enter a 5-year contract at that new number with the COLA. That's it. It's a 5-year. That means we're paying for the new buses. That means we're paying for everything that exists in this contract, rather than taking a 1-year break to use the software, to understand exactly how many routes we need and have, and rebid at that time for a 5-year, or a 4-year if you want, for exactly what we need. As of right now, we went from 11.9 to all of a sudden 10.2, which is an unbelievable feat, but that tells me that something was wrong with this bid process, that we went too high, and now we have to walk ourselves back an enormous amount. So I'm more comfortable, as the person that's got to sign the contract on the other side and submit the budget to the council, rebidding everything and seeing where we end up. Or I was willing to compromise and take Mr. Aguiar's suggestion, which is wait on the Tremblay's contract, see where the yellow buses come back at in a rebid, and then decide what we're going to do. That's my opinion, and that's where I stand on the situation. We've had some discussions individually. I've talked to Mr. Pacheco. I've talked to the superintendent. We're here tonight. You saw my recommendation. The school department concurred with my recommendation, and now we're going to go into a totally different direction with very limited information at your fingertips to say, no, we want to do a 5-year contract at the 10.2, which dropped from 11.9. To me, that's not a smart decision. That just doesn't make sense. We're still financing their buses. We're not exactly sure how many buses we need. They don't know what buses they need to order. We don't know what routes we are certain on. We don't know what routes are going to be dropped, what routes are going to be added. It's just, as Mr. Aguiar said and Mr. Pacheco, it's just a mess. So let's take our step break, let's settle down, let's take the year. We know we need to transport kids. Let's get these bids back out there. Let's see what comes back. And if we're here in a week and the bids are the same, or they're around the $10.2 million, okay, so for 1 year, kids are going to get the buses that they're getting this year. And we're going to have a nice solid year to craft exactly the proposal we want. I don't see how that's not the prudent thing to do.
If the vote passes, I hope that it works in favor of, what you're suggesting. I really do.
Well,
and then at that point in time, I will congratulate you and say,
it's not about
well
congratulations, Mr. Exler. It's about, you're telling me, well, we have a $900,000 number now over what we have that's solid, over something that we don't know what we're going to have. We don't know the number that's going to be rebid. It could be, I'll admit, it could come back at the same number we're talking about now. But guess what? At least we would have tried. I'm not going to take a vote to say, well, I'm not even going to try to rebid it to get the number down because we know that we have a number that we can, on one side, live with. To me, that's not the smart thing to do. If that's what the committee wants to do, then the city will have to assess its options. We came into tonight's meeting with that hope. We were all on the same page, school department and the city side, with our recommendation. If the committee goes into a totally different direction that is at odds with the city's recommendation, the school department's recommendation, then all bets are off. I mean, I'm telling you what we're willing to commit and what we're willing to do, and I'm being unequivocally clear. If this committee decides to go in a totally different direction, hey, that's the committee's decision. But I'm giving you clear information as to why we are making that recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I move the question.
Just a point of order.
Mr. Costa.
The motion was to reject all bids, but there's got to be a motion
Correct.
to rescind first. It's got to come from somebody off the floor.
We never took any votes in the affirmative. We only voted on the number.
No,
No,
on the,
to award Tremblay
Trembley's.
6-1.
Trembley's was specific.
Contract
so
went
that-
down to the city, went to the council, was approved both bodies, sitting
Somebody
and waiting to
in
be
the majority.
executed. That was an action.
I thought that was already done, already voted on the first time.
It was
Right, but you
voted,
want to
we need
reject that
rescind
now,
it.
so you got to
someone in
rescind
the-
it.
Someone in the majority, if that's the will of this committee, has to make a motion to
I
rescind.
understand that, but
Correct.
we had two votes on the discussion of what to do currently. And I think Mr. Aguirre made the motion, which was rejected, was voted no. This is an entirely, which then supersedes the issue of someone saying that, look, I voted yes, I want to vote no in there. And now my motion is the most current on the table.
That is correct, Mr. Martins. However, somebody in the majority would, of that previous motion and a vote to accept Tremblay, specifically Trembley's contract, would have to make a motion to rescind that vote in order for your vote to move forward.
Just a point of
For your-
information. It could be anybody.
It can be anyone.
To rescind, reconsider, it's got to be someone in the majority.
Oh, okay, so anyone, I stand corrected, anyone can rescind.
But I thought,
So you can make a motion to rescind the Trembley's contract, and then we can make another motion after that.
I thought that I just did. Okay. I move to rescind the Tremblay contract.
Okay, is there a
Now I
second?
have two separate motions, one to rescind the Tremblay contract, and then the other to reject all bids and start over again.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there a
I
motion?
think both of those in order.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. Roll call. Question, Mr. Aguirre?
Yeah, just on the, so rescinding the vote, we'd be rescinding the vote, not necessarily the contract, the vote to approve the contract?
Or a contract would
Originally.
go with it.
Yeah. I'm going to vote for this, but I still think the better way was the first vote, but I know how the votes go. So if we don't do this one, the other vote's going to go down. So I'm going to support this, even though I do think I'm very worried about the Tremblay buses. I think that was a good bid. So hopefully we'll get the same thing or better, but, so I'm going to support this reluctantly. Thank you.
Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Coogan?
No?
Mr. Costa?
No.
Mr. Hetzler?
No.
Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
Yes.
Mayor Correa?
Yes. Motion carries. The Trembley's contract is rescinded.
Now my
Well, we
second
need a
motion.
two-thirds vote, so the motion fails. Okay, guys, what do you want to do?
My second motion now,
Nope, the
That one
motion
failed,
failed.
Mr.
You need a two-third, Mr. Martins.
2/3.
Yep, we needed one more vote.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Aguirre?
Might I make a consideration to my colleague, Mr. Martins? The other option is the vote that we just took. I believe you can reconsider that vote on a straight majority. Mr. Saad? The vote we just took, a straight majority, correct? Not this one, the one that we took to get rid of the two contracts. The vote that we had just taken to say, I want to get rid of just the two contracts and not worry about the Trembley's piece, a straight majority vote will allow us to reconsider that vote, and Mr. Martins therefore could vote in the affirmative, which would make it 4-3 at that point.
Yes.
Yes, so Mr. Martins, if you make a motion to reconsider and that goes through, you could vote to get rid of the other two, and we, in essence, would have that vote.
Okay. I move to reconsider previous vote of, on the Tremblay contract.
On the two yellow, the regular ed and special ed yellows.
Why don't you go write it for him?
I think that's the intent of my colleague.
We'll get to you, Joe.
That's
Jesus.
fine, thank you very much for your help.
We're trying to help you.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Second.
Who's on
There was no
first?
motion, it was, he
No,
said.
what's
was.
on second? No, maybe he's on
He
third.
voted no, and he was in the majority. Yeah, on the one that I made a motion, the regular ed and special ed, Mr. Martins was in the majority. That's why we lost the vote. Myself, you, and Mr. Corey were the minority. He was in the majority.
Mr. Martins voted no.
Mr. Martin, so you could reconsider your original,
Yes.
okay? Motion to
Second.
reconsider has been seconded. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Coogan?
No.
Mr. Costa?
No.
Mr. Hetzler?
No.
Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
Yes.
Mayor Correa?
Yes. Okay. So the reconsideration has passed, and now there's a vote on the particular motion that Mr. Aguirre made, which is to reject just the yellow bus transportation.
And yep, regular ed and special ed.
Regular and special ed, yellow bus transportation.
Yellow bus
Tremblay's
transportation.
Stays. You made that in the form of motion, Mr. Aguirre?
Yes, I make that in the form of
Is
a
there a
motion.
second?
Second.
Second. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Coogan?
No.
Mr. Costa?
No.
Mr. Hetzler?
No.
Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
No.
Mayor Correa?
Abstain. Motion does not carry. Okay, guys.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Martins.
A motion on the floor.
Can we clarify that vote and what the motion was on, please, for the membership? Point of parliamentary inquiry.
at this point,
Can we please clarify what that vote was? Because quite frankly, I'm confused.
Was the motion you made?
It was,
It was
No,
your
I'd like it
motion.
to be clarified by the clerk or by the chairman so that all members can be sure what they just voted on.
it was to reject both the regular and special education bids,
Yellow buses.
yellow buses,
Right.
which is what your original motion was.
What was the count, what was the count on the vote?
The count?
Yeah, what was the final count?
Mr. Martins, are you aware of that?
It was 2 yeses,
I believe you wanted to vote yes and you
4
voted no.
noes, and 1 abstained.
You voted yes to reconsider, then you
You want to
voted
sit
no
over
on
here
the...
and take his vote for him, Mr. Aguirre?
Well, I was going to say.
Okay, all right,
This
all right.
Motion to adjourn.
Are you
Hold on.
serious now?
Motion
Like,
to adjourn.
are we really serious in
Guys.
public? We're going to start telling somebody what they should have voted on.
Okay,
I know.
excuse me.
I mean, why don't you?
Excuse me.
Give the guy more credit than that. He's been on a committee forever. He
Guys.
knows what he's taking votes on.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, please. All right. Are there any additional motions on the floor?
Motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn has been made. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes?
Mr. Coogan?
Yes.
Mr. Costa?
Yes.
Mr. Hetzler?
Yes.
Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
no.
Mayor Correa?
No. Meeting is adjourned.